What's up guys, welcome to Tank Control Games, back with another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to create a limb-based hit detection system that can identify exactly which body part was hit. This can be used to trigger dismemberment, play hit reactions per limb, and drive other gameplay effects. In today's example, I'll walk you through how to create this fun confetti headshot explosion. If that sounds cool, make sure you like and subscribe, it really helps the channel grow, and with that out of the way, we'll get started. I'm working in Unreal 5.7.4 using Epic's free arena shooter project as a base. When creating your project, select the first person template, and then choose the arena shooter variant from the dropdown. I also added the third person template content and duplicated the character blueprint and renamed it BP_enemy. For the headshot reaction, I downloaded a free animation from Mixamo and retargeted it onto the Unreal mannequin. Okay, so in my project, I dragged out my BP_enemy, and I also dragged out this BP shooter pickup, which comes from the arena example. And if you go under the details panel, you'll see this data table, which will have the weapon list and then a row name. And then you can choose the pistol, grenade launcher, or rifle. I'm just gonna use the pistol for the tutorial. And then you'll also wanna set your world settings to use the BP shooter game mode. And if you're opening up the arena level itself, this will all be set by default. But if you're doing it in the third person level like I am, you'll wanna set that. So if I click play now, you'll see I have the HUD from the arena shooter. And if I walk over the pickup, I can pick up a pistol. And shooting it at the wall, it creates these kind of like Nerf darts that you can see here. So if we go to the content drawer, we can search for weapon base, and then open up that BP shooter weapon base. So it opened right to the fire bullet function. And if you look here, this is actually where we're spawning the projectile, and we're just gonna replace that with the line trace. So what we can do is just unhook this up, and then let's create a line trace by channel. And that'll have a start and end. And then for the trace channel, we're going to choose visibility. And then let's just hook up our sequence to our line trace, and we'll add a reroute node just to give us some room. And then what we can do is get player camera manager, and then we want to get our camera location. And then that's going to be your start. And then for the end, we're going to do a little math. So we're going to get our camera rotation, multiply this by 1,000, and then we're going to add our start location to that. And we also want to ignore our player character from this trace, so what we can do is just get player character, drag off of actors to ignore, do make array, and then just hook that up. Then one thing we should do, because we're tracing by visibility, we need to go in our BP enemy, and then under the mesh, if you go to collision, you're just going to want to make sure that if yours is at the pawn or set to default, just switch it to custom, and then set where it says visibility for trace responses, just make sure that that's set to block or this won't work. Then what we can do, we can break our hit result. So drag out of out hit, do break hit result, and then drop that down, and you can see all of these different options we get. And then we're gonna start by doing a check and just make sure that we have a blocking hit. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the hit actor, and we're only gonna do something when we've actually hit our enemy. So let's do cast BP enemy. All right, so now what we're gonna do, we're gonna use physics materials to actually create our hit detection. So most templates, the third person template included, has a physics asset ready for the mannequin. So if you search PA_mannequin, you'll find the physics asset. And if you click, these are all the different physics bodies. So what's cool about this, you can select any of these physics bodies and then just go to the details panel, and you can search for override. And you can find this physics material override section. And we can set this to be any physics material that we want. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to group sections of the body here using the physics materials, and be able to detect that and know exactly which body part we hit. So to set that up, what we're going to do is go to our content drawer, and we're going to right click and just create some physics materials. So search for physics material, click it, just do select, and then call it PM_. And I'm going to do one for the head, and then I'm just going to duplicate that and then do one for the torso, duplicate again. I'm going to do L_leg, and then duplicate R_leg, and then make one for right and left arm as well. Okay, and then with all of your physics materials created, then you just have to go back to your physics asset, and then just select the groups that you want, and then just choose physics material override, and we'll do for head and neck, the head, and just make sure actually we get all three neck controls. And then I'm gonna select these, basically the clavicle all the way to the hand, and then I'll do R_arm, and then I'm gonna do the same for the left arm. Select all the torso controls, and I'm going all the way down to the pelvis for mine. Like, you can really separate this however you want, just make more physics assets, but I'm just gonna keep it a little simpler, and then just do the left leg and the right leg. Okay, perfect. So then save your asset, and then if we go back to our shooter weapon base, the way we actually detect that, we just drag off the physics material, and then we can just check what the display name is by getting display name. And then what we're going to do too, just for printing this out and just to make it a little simpler, we're going to remove the physics material underscore from the naming convention. So just get the replace node, and then it'll say from and to. So for from, we want to get the section we want to replace, which is PM underscore, and we're just going to replace it with nothing. Then I have a fancier way I was doing this in the start of the video, but this is going to be a much simpler way to actually display what you're hitting and kind of display it on the character's body as you're doing the line trace. So the easiest way to do that without doing kind of fancier stuff with widgets is just to do draw debug string. And then that'll make a string at a location, so we can just get our hit location. And then the text is going to be our appended name for the physics material, so just hook that up there. And then for duration, just make it 2. Okay, so now let's test this. If we go to our level and click play, if we pick up our weapon, and then we go to our character and shoot them anywhere on their body, we'll get the text and the correct limb that's hit. So left arm, right arm, torso, head. So that's all working. So the next thing we want to do is actually create our headshot function. So let's go into our BP enemy, and we're just going to make a new custom event, and we'll call this headshot. The first thing we're going to do for our headshot is we're going to play a montage for the actual headshot animation. So we're just going to search for play montage off the mesh. And then for the montage itself, I created this AM headshot, again from that Mixamo animation I mentioned in the beginning. And this is what it looks like. It's pretty basic. They do start from like holding a rifle pose, but for this demo, it's going to be fine. It's going to blend into that anyways. So then we just want to choose that montage. So I'll search for headshot. And then after playing the montage, I'm going to hide the head, so it actually looks like their head got shot off. And the way you can do that is to just get the mesh, and then search for hide bone by name. And we'll play that right after the montage triggers. And then for the bone name, we're going to choose the head. And you can also do this dynamically to just make, basically a dismemberment system is instead of, manually setting this here in your shooter base, like this can be the trigger as long as the names match. And then we also only want to trigger this when the character's dead. So we're going to add a variable and we'll say is dead, or we'll say b is dead. And then you can drag that out into the graph and just do set, and we'll set that to be true just after we hide the bone there. And then I have a couple sound effects that I'm going to play because we're going to do this kind of fun confetti explosion when the head disappears. And I have a couple different sounds. So let's also play a few sounds at location. So play sound at location. And then for the location, let's actually drag off the mesh and just get socket location. And the head will obviously be gone, but we'll just get where it was. So get socket head, play sound at location. And then for the sounds, I have a horn celebration sound, which sounds like this. And then I also have this confetti explosion. So we're going to play both of those together. And then the last thing we're going to do is spawn the confetti, but we didn't make that yet. So I'll just search for spawn system at location. And then we're not going to hook it up yet because we're going to make our effect and then we'll hook it up after. Okay, so then what we want to do is go into our weapon shooter base. And then before we actually trigger the headshot here, we want to check that the enemy isn't dead. So search for is dead. We'll get that and then we'll drag off and do not. So we want to check that they are not dead and also that you hit the head. So we'll do an and boolean. Then you can string together different conditions using this. So what we're going to do is drag off of the physics material, get an equal node, and then we're just going to check that this is not em underscore head, and then hook that up to the and node, and then that'll be our condition. So we'll make a branch. If you're not dead, you are hitting the head, then we will play our headshot animation. So search for our headshot function, hook that up to true. Okay, so now let's click play and test this out. So if we pick up our weapon and then we shoot the character anywhere but the head, it's gonna just print out the name. But then when we shoot the head, the animation plays. And then you'll notice obviously they went back into stand. So what we need to do is trigger Ragdoll somewhere during that montage. So a really easy way to do that, we'll just create an Anim Notify. So go to Blueprint class, search for Notify, Anim Notify, and then do select, and just call it an underscore Ragdoll. And then double click it open, and then go to overridable functions, do receive to notify, and then just get mesh component, get owner, do cast to BP underscore enemy. And then in our enemy, let's really quick just make a custom event and call it Ragdoll. And then a really simple way to trigger Ragdoll, we're just going to get the mesh and then do set simulate physics. Just mark that to be true. And then one other thing you have to do is make sure that your mesh is set to physics body for object type. And then just hook that up, do compile. And then let's call that from our trigger Ragdoll notify. So search for Ragdoll, hook that up, return true. And then let's add that to our montage. So somewhere towards the end after they're, maybe like right before they're about to fall on the ground, just go to the notify section, add notify, and then find our trigger Ragdoll. Okay, so let's test again. So get our gun, shoot them in the head. Yep, and now they Ragdoll and they don't stand again. Cool, so that is all working. Now really the last step is just creating our confetti, and this is gonna be really simple as well. So let's just make a new Niagara emitter. And then for the base, just choose confetti burst to create, and we'll just call this NE confetti. And then we also need a material for our confetti squares. So what we're going to do is just create a material, call it M underscore confetti square, double click that open. And then for this material, it can stay surface, but instead of blend mode opaque, choose masked. And then instead of default lit, just do unlit. And then we just want to right click and get particle color. And this will just let us change the color of this in our actual Niagara system. So we're going to hook this up to the emissive color, do apply and save. Then let's go back to our content drawer, right click on our confetti and do create Niagara system. Double click that open. So by default, it doesn't really look too much like confetti. So what we're going to do is first, if you select right here at the top, you can see the material for the sprite. And we're just going to change that to our confetti square. Then we're going to choose initialize particle. And then for the color, we're just going to click this little drop down and then we're going to do random range linear color. But let's actually amp up the number of particles we're seeing here and the size. So click on spawn burst instantaneous, and then instead of 100, let's do 500. And then also back under initialize particle for the size, let's make it 2 for the min and then 5 for the max, just to give us some bigger particles to work with. And then one setting that I forgot to set under color channel mode, let's just make that random individual colors. And then now if we click play, you'll see we got all of these different little squares that have multicolors, so it looks definitely a lot more like confetti. Yeah, super easy. And then the very last thing we're going to do is go under particle update, just do collision. And then instead of GPU depth buffer, we're just going to choose GPU distance fields. Cool, so that's the whole effect done, so just do save. Then back in BP enemy, we're just going to hook up our effect at the very end here. So we're just going to get our location again and just plug that in. And then we're going to choose our confetti system. So now if we click play, we grab our gun and test. Confetti spawns, it has collision so it lands on the ground, and yeah, that's the whole effect done. So that's the basic setup, but it really unlocks a lot of potential. You can obviously set this up with other effects for headshots, do things like shooting the leg to drop the character, or create a dismemberment system. I'm thinking of doing a future video for limb health and also a deeper dive into hit reactions, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. But I think that's where we're going to wrap it. Did you enjoy the video? If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps my channel out. And join our Discord community if you want to share what you're working on for your own projects. I'd love to see it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.